Archangel Michael says, you must hear this before you do anything else, before you close this video, before you return to whatever task or distraction was occupying you a moment ago, before this particular window of clarity closes and ordinary daily busyness reclaims your full attention once again. Stop scrolling. Set aside whatever else feels urgent right now, because none of it is as urgent as what you are about to hear. This is not an exaggeration meant to manipulate your attention. It is a genuine statement about priority, about what actually deserves your full presence in this specific moment, rather than the partial, distracted attention that most content receives amid the constant competing demands of an ordinary day. Take a breath. Let your body settle. Whatever noise has been filling your mind, quiet it now, because what follows requires genuine stillness in order to actually be received the way it is meant to be received. Here is what you must hear. You have been living, for some time now, with a specific truth quietly present beneath the surface of your daily awareness, a truth you have sensed but have not yet fully allowed yourself to acknowledge directly. This message exists to bring that truth fully into the light, not to create it out of nothing, but to name clearly what some part of you has already known for quite some time. This truth is specific to you, shaped by your own particular circumstances, but it likely falls into one of several common patterns that tend to operate quietly in most people's lives, patterns worth naming clearly so you can recognize which one applies most directly to your own current situation. Perhaps the truth involves a relationship that has quietly stopped serving you the way it once did, a connection you continue maintaining out of habit, obligation, or fear of change, rather than out of genuine ongoing value and mutual benefit. You have felt this shift, in small moments, in a gradual sense of distance or discomfort that has grown slowly enough that it has been easy to dismiss or explain away, rather than confronted directly as the significant shift it actually represents. Think about the specific moments when this shift has felt most noticeable, small instances that, taken individually, seemed easy to dismiss, but that, viewed together honestly, reveal a clearer, more consistent pattern than any single instance suggested on its own. A conversation that felt more effortful than it once did. A shared activity that no longer brings the same genuine enjoyment it once provided. A specific comment or interaction that lingered uncomfortably longer than it perhaps should have, revealing something significant beneath its surface-level content. Perhaps the truth involves work or career, a role or path that no longer aligns with who you have become, even though you continue showing up daily out of financial necessity, fear of change, or simple inertia that has quietly become more comfortable than confronting the genuine question of whether this remains the right path for you moving forward. Perhaps the truth involves your own health, physical or mental, a pattern of neglect or unaddressed concern that you have been managing through avoidance rather than genuine attention, telling yourself you will address it once circumstances become more convenient, a convenient moment that somehow never quite arrives. Perhaps the truth involves a dream or aspiration you have quietly set aside, convinced yourself was unrealistic or no longer relevant, even though some part of you continues returning to it in quiet, unguarded moments, refusing to fully disappear despite your repeated attempts to dismiss it as impractical or no longer worth pursuing. Perhaps the truth involves a pattern within yourself, a way of relating to fear, to vulnerability, to conflict, that has been quietly shaping your choices and relationships for years, operating largely below conscious awareness, deserving far more honest examination than it has received up until this point. Whatever specific form this truth takes in your own life, you likely recognized it, at least in part, as you read through these possibilities, some flicker of recognition or discomfort signaling that one or more of these patterns connects directly to your own actual current circumstances. Here is why this message insists you must hear this now, before anything else, rather than allowing this recognition to fade back into the comfortable background of ordinary daily distraction the way similar recognitions have likely faded before. Truths like this one do not resolve themselves simply through continued waiting. They persist, quietly, consuming energy and attention even while remaining unaddressed, until either they are finally faced directly, or circumstances eventually force a more difficult reckoning that could have been approached more gently and deliberately had it been addressed earlier, while still within your own conscious control rather than being forced upon you by external circumstances beyond your control. Think about a specific example, from your own past experience or from someone you know, where a truth left unaddressed for too long eventually forced a much more difficult reckoning than would have been necessary had it been faced earlier and more deliberately. This kind of delayed reckoning often arrives at a worse time, with fewer resources or options available, and with additional complications that had accumulated during the period of continued avoidance. Reflecting honestly on this pattern, whether in your own life or observed in others, can help illustrate why addressing this current truth sooner, while genuine choice and control remain available, tends to serve significantly better than continued postponement toward some eventual forced reckoning. Think about how much energy has likely been consumed, quietly, by whatever truth you have identified as most relevant to your own situation. Not necessarily dramatic, visible energy expenditure, but a persistent, low-grade drain, present in the background of your daily experience, whether or not you have consciously registered its ongoing presence and cost. This energy, once released through genuine acknowledgement and appropriate action, becomes available for other purposes, for pursuits and relationships and possibilities that have likely been quietly starved of attention precisely because so much energy has been consumed maintaining the comfortable avoidance of whatever truth has been sitting unaddressed. Here is what genuine acknowledgement actually requires, since simply reading about this truth abstractly, without genuinely engaging with its specific application to your own life, accomplishes relatively little on its own. Genuine acknowledgement requires naming the truth specifically, clearly, without the vague, softened language that avoidance tends to prefer. If your identified truth involves a relationship, name specifically what has shifted, what no longer feels aligned, what specific pattern or dynamic has been quietly troubling you. Vague dissatisfaction is easy to dismiss. Specific, named concerns are much harder to continue avoiding once they have been clearly articulated, even if only internally, to yourself. If your identified truth involves work or career, name specifically what feels misaligned, what specific aspect of your current path no longer fits who you have become. Is it the work itself, the environment, the values embedded in the organization, the specific relationships involved, or something else entirely? Specificity here transforms a vague sense of dissatisfaction into something you can actually work with deliberately, rather than something that simply generates ongoing discomfort without ever pointing toward any clear direction for potential change. If your identified truth involves health, name specifically what has been neglected or avoided. A specific symptom left unexamined. A specific habit that continues despite knowing its cost. A specific appointment repeatedly postponed. Specificity here transforms vague health anxiety into a concrete, addressable matter, rather than a diffuse worry that generates stress without ever producing the concrete action actually needed to resolve it. If your identified truth involves a dream or aspiration, name specifically what that dream actually is, in concrete terms rather than vague, general longing. What specifically would pursuing this dream actually involve, practically, in your real life, rather than remaining an abstract, idealized possibility that never quite translates into any concrete first steps. If your identified truth involves an internal pattern, name specifically what that pattern actually is, how it manifests in specific situations, what specific triggers tend to activate it. Understanding the specific mechanism of a pattern, rather than simply acknowledging its general existence, tends to make that pattern significantly easier to actually work with and gradually change over time. Here is something worth understanding about why avoidance feels so persistently comfortable, even when a person consciously understands, intellectually, that facing something directly would likely serve them better in the long run. Avoidance offers immediate relief from discomfort, while the cost of continued avoidance remains distributed, spread thin across many days and weeks, rarely feeling significant enough on any single day to actually motivate a change in behavior. This asymmetry, immediate relief for avoidance, distributed cost for continued postponement, versus immediate discomfort for direct engagement, distributed relief for genuine resolution, helps explain why avoidance remains such a persistent pattern even among people who consciously value honesty and direct engagement with difficult matters in the abstract. Understanding this asymmetry explicitly can help you make a more genuinely informed choice, recognizing that continued avoidance is not actually the lower-cost option, even though it consistently feels that way in each individual moment, precisely because of how differently these two costs get distributed across time. Here is what actually needs to happen next, now that you have identified and named, at least internally, whatever specific truth applies most directly to your own current situation. This message is not asking you to resolve everything completely, immediately, within these next few minutes. It is asking you to take one genuine, concrete step, moving this matter from the category of things perpetually avoided into the category of things actively being addressed. Notice, honestly, whether your mind is already generating reasons why this particular week or month is not the ideal time to actually take this step, reasons that likely sound reasonable and practical in the moment but that, examined more closely, often function primarily as sophisticated continuations of the same avoidance pattern this message has been encouraging you to move beyond throughout its entirety. If such reasons are already arising, consider them honestly, but do not automatically accept them as sufficient justification for continued postponement without genuine examination of whether they actually hold up under closer, more honest scrutiny. If your truth involves a relationship, this step might be having one honest conversation, even a brief one, acknowledging directly what has shifted rather than continuing to pretend nothing has changed. It might mean simply naming, to yourself first, what you actually want from this relationship moving forward, clarifying your own genuine position before attempting to communicate it to anyone else. If your truth involves work or career, this step might be researching one specific alternative path, or having one honest conversation with someone who has successfully navigated a similar transition, gathering real information rather than continuing to operate purely on assumption and fear about what change might actually require or produce. If your truth involves health, this step might be scheduling one specific appointment, or beginning one specific small change today, rather than continuing to wait for a more comprehensive plan that keeps getting postponed precisely because its scope feels too large to actually begin. If your truth involves a dream or aspiration, this step might be dedicating one specific block of time this week toward actually beginning, even in a small, imperfect way, rather than continuing to wait for ideal circumstances that may never fully materialize if action continues being postponed indefinitely. If your truth involves an internal pattern, this step might be simply noticing, consciously, the next time this pattern activates, without necessarily trying to change your behavior entirely in that specific moment, but rather building the foundational awareness that eventual change actually requires. Here is something worth understanding about the specific timing of this message, why it insists on immediate attention rather than allowing this reflection to develop gradually over an extended period. Some truths genuinely benefit from patient, gradual unfolding. But once a truth has already been circling quietly in your awareness for some time, as the truths described throughout this message likely have been for you, additional patience often functions less as genuine wisdom and more as sophisticated avoidance, extending a process that has already had ample time to develop naturally without ever quite reaching genuine resolution. If this describes your own situation, where the truth you have identified has already been present in some form for weeks, months, or even years, this message is suggesting that the time for additional patience has likely passed, and what remains genuinely needed now is direct, immediate engagement rather than continued waiting for some future moment that feels more convenient or more certain. Consider what specifically has made this particular truth so persistently difficult to face directly, beyond the general asymmetry of avoidance already discussed. Sometimes a specific fear underlies the avoidance, fear of a particular outcome, fear of how others might react, fear of what facing this truth might require you to subsequently change in your broader life. Sometimes it is simply discomfort itself, an aversion to difficult emotions that has nothing to do with any specific feared outcome but rather reflects a more general pattern of avoiding emotional discomfort regardless of what that discomfort might actually be pointing toward. Understanding which of these applies more accurately to your own specific situation can help you address the underlying obstacle more directly. If a specific fear is operating, examine that fear honestly, asking how likely the feared outcome actually is, and whether you would genuinely be unable to handle it even if it did occur, given everything you have already survived and handled throughout your life up to this point. If general discomfort avoidance is the primary pattern, practice tolerating smaller doses of discomfort deliberately, building capacity gradually rather than continuing to avoid discomfort entirely and thereby never developing greater tolerance for facing difficult matters directly. Here is something worth understanding about support during this process, since facing a significant truth entirely alone often proves more difficult than necessary when genuine support could actually be available if you were willing to seek it out directly. Think about who in your life might serve as a valuable source of support as you begin addressing whatever truth this message has helped you identify and name clearly. This person does not need to have all the answers or perfect wisdom about your specific situation. They simply need to offer genuine, non-judgmental presence, someone willing to listen honestly as you work through whatever this particular truth requires of you. Someone who can offer encouragement without either dismissing the genuine difficulty involved or reinforcing whatever fear or avoidance has kept you from addressing this truth directly up until this point. If such a person exists in your life, consider reaching out to them soon, sharing at least part of what you have reflected on during this message, allowing their support to help sustain your engagement with this truth over the coming days and weeks, beyond simply this initial moment of recognition and reflection. Think about the specific role that self-compassion plays as you begin engaging with whatever truth this message has helped you identify, since harsh self-criticism about having avoided this truth for however long you have been avoiding it tends to work against genuine engagement rather than supporting it. If you notice yourself criticizing yourself harshly for not having addressed this truth sooner, consider gently redirecting that criticism toward simple, compassionate acknowledgement instead, recognizing that avoidance is an extremely common human pattern, not a unique personal failing that sets you apart from everyone else who has ever struggled with facing something difficult directly. Self-compassion here does not mean excusing continued avoidance or treating this truth as unimportant simply because feeling compassion toward yourself feels more comfortable than genuine engagement. It means approaching yourself with the same kindness and understanding you would naturally extend to a friend facing a similar situation, while still maintaining genuine commitment to actually addressing the truth directly, rather than allowing self-compassion to become simply another sophisticated form of avoidance disguised as gentle self-care. Consider, too, what specific internal narrative has been supporting your continued avoidance up until this point, since these narratives often operate quietly in the background, rarely examined directly even though they significantly influence ongoing behavior. Perhaps a narrative suggesting that addressing this truth would require more courage or capability than you currently possess. Perhaps a narrative suggesting that the timing has simply never been right, always slightly postponed to some more convenient future moment. Perhaps a narrative suggesting that this truth, once faced directly, would prove more devastating or disruptive than it likely actually would be in reality. Examine whichever specific narrative applies most directly to your own situation, asking honestly whether it accurately reflects reality, or whether it functions primarily as a comfortable justification for continued postponement, one that feels reasonable in the moment while actually preventing the genuine engagement that would likely serve you significantly better over time. Think, too, about what specific evidence from your own past experience might contradict whatever narrative has been supporting your continued avoidance. Have you faced difficult truths before, in other areas of your life, and found yourself more capable of handling them than you initially expected? Have previous instances of avoided truths, once finally addressed, actually turned out less devastating than the anticipation of addressing them had suggested? This kind of honest reflection on your own actual track record, rather than simply your anticipatory fears, can help build genuine confidence that you are indeed capable of facing this current truth directly, regardless of how intimidating that prospect might currently feel. Here is something further worth understanding about the specific relationship between this moment of recognition and your broader capacity for honest self-awareness going forward. Each time a person successfully moves from avoidance toward genuine engagement with a difficult truth, this success tends to build confidence and capacity for handling future instances of difficult truth more effectively, creating a kind of positive cycle where genuine engagement becomes progressively easier to choose over continued avoidance, rather than remaining equally difficult each time a new difficult truth eventually emerges. This means the significance of what you do in response to this particular message extends beyond simply this one specific truth currently under consideration. It also contributes to your broader capacity for honest self-awareness and genuine engagement with difficulty, a capacity that will likely prove valuable again and again throughout your life, as new difficult truths inevitably continue emerging over time, as they do for every person regardless of how skillfully any particular instance happens to be navigated. Here is a final significant consideration before this message reaches its close. This particular moment of clarity, however genuine and significant it currently feels, will not remain equally vivid and accessible indefinitely. Ordinary daily life has a consistent tendency to reclaim attention, gradually diminishing the vividness of even genuinely significant insights and realizations, unless deliberate action is taken relatively soon after the initial recognition occurs, while that recognition still retains its full clarity and motivational force. This is precisely why this message insists you must hear this before doing anything else, rather than allowing it to become simply one more piece of content encountered and then quickly set aside, absorbed into the general background noise of countless similar messages consumed throughout an ordinary day without producing any lasting, meaningful change in actual behavior or circumstances. Consider what specific action you can take within the next hour, not the next week or month, but the next hour, that would represent genuine movement toward addressing whatever truth this message has helped you identify. This does not need to be the complete resolution. It simply needs to be real, concrete evidence that this particular moment of recognition actually translated into meaningful action, rather than remaining purely theoretical. Another interesting reflection quickly forgotten once your attention shifts toward whatever comes next in your ordinary day. Think about how you will feel, later today or tomorrow, if you allow this particular moment of clarity to pass by unaddressed, compared to how you would feel having actually taken some genuine action in response to it. Most people, looking back honestly at moments of clear recognition that were allowed to pass without corresponding action, report significant regret, not necessarily regret about the specific truth itself, but regret about having let a genuine opportunity for meaningful change slip by unclaimed, joining the accumulated pattern of similar missed opportunities that most people carry, often without fully acknowledging how significant that accumulated pattern has actually become over time. You do not need to add to that accumulated pattern today. You have the opportunity, right now, in this specific moment, to respond differently than you might have responded to similar moments of recognition in the past, choosing genuine engagement over continued postponement, honest acknowledgement over comfortable avoidance, real action over another instance of insight quickly forgotten. Here is something worth remembering as you move forward from this particular message. The truth you have identified today did not appear from nowhere, generated artificially by this message's specific language and framing. It was already present, quietly, in your own awareness, waiting for the right moment to be brought fully into conscious recognition. This message simply provided that moment, that specific occasion for genuine acknowledgement, but the underlying truth itself belongs entirely to you, reflecting your own genuine life circumstances rather than anything artificially constructed or suggested by this particular content. This means the responsibility for what happens next also belongs entirely to you. This message cannot take the concrete action required on your behalf. It cannot have the difficult conversation, schedule the necessary appointment, begin the postponed dream, or interrupt the internal pattern that has been operating largely below your conscious awareness. It can only offer what it has already offered, genuine acknowledgement of a truth likely already present in your own awareness, along with encouragement and practical guidance for how you might actually begin addressing it directly. The remaining work belongs to you, beginning with whatever small, concrete step feels most immediately available, continuing through whatever additional steps become necessary over the coming days and weeks as this particular truth continues being addressed more fully and completely over time. Before this message reaches its true close, take one final moment for yourself, genuinely absorbing what has emerged throughout this reflection rather than rushing immediately toward whatever comes next in your day. Name, specifically, the truth you have identified as most relevant to your own current situation. Name, specifically, the concrete step you intend to take within the next hour, moving this truth from the category of things perpetually avoided into the category of things actively being addressed. This does not need to feel dramatic or overwhelming in order to matter significantly. It simply needs to feel genuine, real engagement rather than another moment of temporary insight quickly forgotten once this message ends and your attention naturally returns to whatever else occupies your ordinary day. Trust that this particular message reached you today for a genuine reason, connecting specifically to a truth already present in your own awareness rather than arriving randomly or without relevance to your actual life circumstances. Something in you recognized this relevance clearly enough to continue reading this far, past the point where you might have scrolled away had this message genuinely carried no significance or connection to your own specific situation. There is one more layer worth adding before this message truly comes to its close, something practical that helps ensure this moment of recognition actually translates into sustained, meaningful action over the coming days and weeks ahead. Think about what specific record you might keep as you continue engaging with this particular truth beyond today, some form of documentation that allows you to track genuine progress over time rather than relying purely on memory to preserve the clarity and commitment you feel right now, in this specific moment of first receiving this message. This does not need to be elaborate or time-consuming. A simple note, written somewhere you will actually encounter again, briefly describing the truth you have identified and the action you intend to take, can serve as valuable evidence later, helping you track whether genuine follow-through has actually occurred, or whether this particular recognition has simply joined the pattern of previous recognitions that faded without producing lasting change. Consider, too, setting a specific check-in point for yourself, perhaps 1 week from today, to honestly review whether the action you committed to taking has actually occurred, and if not, to examine honestly what specifically prevented that follow-through, rather than simply allowing the intention to quietly dissolve without any accountability or honest examination of what happened. This kind of structured accountability, even when self-imposed rather than externally enforced, tends to significantly increase the likelihood that genuine action actually follows initial recognition and commitment. Think about how you will handle the specific moment when the initial motivation from this message begins to fade, as it inevitably will once ordinary daily life resumes its usual pace and its usual competing demands for your attention. This fading is normal and does not indicate that your original recognition was somehow mistaken or insufficiently significant. It simply reflects how motivation naturally functions, requiring deliberate structure and continued practice in order to translate genuine initial insight into sustained, meaningful behavioral change over an extended period. Consider what specific structure might help you sustain engagement beyond this initial moment of motivation, whether through the accountability relationship already discussed, through a specific daily or weekly practice of checking in honestly with yourself about continued progress, or through simply returning to this particular message periodically, allowing its content to continue reinforcing your commitment even as the initial emotional intensity of first reading it naturally diminishes somewhat over time. Think, too, about what genuine success actually looks like as you continue addressing whatever truth this message has helped you identify, recognizing that success rarely means instant, complete resolution achieved within a single conversation or action. Success more often looks like consistent, honest engagement over time, gradual movement in the direction of genuine resolution, even if that resolution takes considerably longer to fully develop than you might initially hope or expect. Holding this more realistic understanding of what genuine progress actually looks like can help you avoid the discouragement that sometimes arises when initial action does not immediately produce complete resolution, a discouragement that can otherwise tempt a person back toward the more comfortable pattern of avoidance this entire message has been encouraging you to move beyond. Consider, as well, what you might say to yourself during moments of doubt or difficulty that are likely to arise as you continue this process beyond today, moments when the clarity and commitment you feel right now begin to feel more distant or uncertain. Having a specific, brief phrase or reminder prepared in advance, something you can return to easily during these more difficult moments, can help sustain engagement even when the initial motivation that first prompted this reflection has naturally diminished somewhat over time. This message reached you today for a reason. Trust that. Carry it with you. And when you are ready, not before, not because anyone told you to, but when you are genuinely ready, take your next step. Deep down, you already know what that step is. Thank you for receiving this message today, for choosing to actually hear this before returning to everything else that had been demanding your attention. Be gentle with yourself as you continue addressing this truth, one honest, deliberate action at a time.